Hey, good morning. Welcome to What's Up, Joe, with your hosts Dan Scrabbit and Bob Birch. This is a weekly program where we take a behind-the-scenes look at articles from the Journal of Extension. Today's guest is Julie Tritz from West Virginia University, and our topic is participatory research. Welcome, everybody. Hey, good morning, Bob. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good. So, has the polar whatever it is moved down into North Dakota?
The vortex is descending. Yes.
The vortex, polar vortex, absolutely.
We had the nasty two-word phrase wind chill mentioned for the first time this year. So today.
Man.
Yeah. Once they start mentioning wind chill, it's officially winter. So.
Right on. So, hey, for our guests out there, before we introduce our special guest, just want to remind you, up in the upper right-hand corner is an option to ask questions. So if you got any questions for Julie, toss them up there, and we'll see if we can attend to them. But our guest today is Julie Tritz, as I mentioned, from West Virginia University, and we are going to talk about participatory research. Julie, how are things in West Virginia? You mentioned that we were going to get a little snow that way.
Yeah, it just stopped snowing, so we've had, I think, probably our first measurable snowfall for the season, which is nice and depressing in the same vein. So.
Right on. So, hey, let's get started on this topic. So you wrote this article for the Journal of Extension, came out in August, talking about participatory research, and you said it kind of differed from qualitative and quantitative. Can you just kind of explain that a little bit, because I can't wrap my head around it just yet?
Okay, sure. This research, participatory research, is basically it's a collective process of investigation, education, and action that really involves kind of like, in my case, like myself as a researcher, and then different community groups that want to participate. So it's a really kind of a collaborative effort between kind of, could be kind of a 4-H group, it could be another kind of adult community group as such, and you're kind of trying to basically solve and address issues of concern kind of in a community, kind of looking to create kind of new knowledge and social change around kind of what's at issue kind of in a community.
So Julie, I mean, when we think of more traditional modes of research, our researchers are often choosing, the issues or the questions to investigate. If anybody, who sets the agenda when you're doing participatory research?
Ideally, it's kind of from the ground up. It would be a community group that would kind of come identify an issue that they would want to kind of learn more about, to study more, and so on. So in ideal cases, that's where kind of the community group would kind of approach a researcher. But in most cases, it would be like someone like me who's interested in participatory research, reaching out to a community group, kind of to see if they would be interested in a collaborative effort to kind of explore an issue per se.
Okay, and
maybe, Stan, just to elaborate on that a little bit, I did my my doctoral work in Ireland, in fact, and that's where I did primarily the bulk of my participatory research experience. So this article kind of comes from my doctoral research. So kind of just elaborating a little bit more on participatory research as an alternative approach to kind of, say, quantitative or qualitative research.
Okay, and so what methods are you? Yeah, like I said.
Yeah, perfect. I can take it from there, Stan. I can take it from there. Within participatory research, there are a variety of different methods, and the two methods that I used was one called photo voice, which is using photography as a means to kind of engage a community. Basically, a community identifies a particular issue. They photograph that issue, they reflect on that issue, and then it leads to an exhibition of their work, where then the community group, in partnership with the researcher, would invite kind of community stakeholders, policymakers, politicians, and so on, and have a discussion around those photographs as a way to kind of incite change in a community per se.
So
and the other.
Okay, so on that, on the photo voice, right? So, so you're building artifacts. Is there any kind of research report that comes out? Because this sounds, in my mind, kind of,
it sounds
qualitative.
yeah, exactly. And it kind of is a complete departure from any kind of report, kind of in the spirit of a lot of times, like policymakers or politicians, they will get like 1,000-page report kind of on their desk, whereas in contrast, this would engage them. Kind of, a lot of people are visual learners by nature, so if you come to an exhibition, it's a great way to engage community stakeholders, politicians, and so on. And at the same time, it's very accessible, kind of for young people or adult populations to kind of take still images and have a conversation around those images.
Julie, I think it might help me and Stan and our audience as well. Maybe could you walk us through your experience in Ireland, just from how you started the process, and then maybe in as much detail as you want, all the way to what was the end product, if you want to call it that.
Right, and I'm going to do a screencast real quick to, and it's not coming up. There it is. This is where I conducted my participatory research. I was based in Ireland for 5 years. That's where I got my doctoral degree. And so I was based in Dublin for 2 years of my research, and then I traveled to the west coast of Ireland. So I know the map of Ireland is very tiny, but I was based in County Clare on the west of Ireland, as well as County Kerry. So in the lower left-hand photo is Kilkee, which is where I worked with one women's group. In all three of these different towns in Ireland, I did both photo voice as well as participatory video, which is another participatory research method. So in Kilkee, County Clare, I worked with the women's groups and conducted these methodologies. And in Rathmore and Bantir, they were both youth groups. And so basically it was a European Union project that provided the funding and the seed money in which to conduct this participatory research project in these counties. So as you both have mentioned, or both kind of alluded to, or we discussed earlier, how ideally participatory research is really kind of, in an ideal setting, it's driven from the ground up. Kind of a community comes and approaches a researcher saying kind of, we would like to collaborate on a particular issue per se, but in this case it was the university kind of approaching these different communities and asking them if they would be interested in addressing kind of basically using the methodologies photo voice and participatory video in which to learn more about issues that these different communities are facing. And so in a lot of cases, in all three cases, kind of they were kind of struggling with kind of issues that pertained, that we see in a lot of rural communities, such as lack of transportation, lack of access to different types of public services, and so on. So those are kind of the common themes that came as a result of this research.
So the themes came out of the research, you didn't go into it necessarily saying, well, we have these problems, lack of transportation, lack of access to services, how do we document that or research that?
Yeah, you're exactly right, That was a result. So I, as a researcher, did not go in with any preconceived notions. Naturally, you go in, kind of, you do a lit review to try and understand the methodology, to try and understand kind of the particular audience in which you're working with, and so on. But again, the whole idea behind participatory research is not to go in with preconceived notions, and that it really is kind of a collaborative effort. And that's part of some of the difficulties with participatory research, because our human nature is, to want to fix, to want to know everything. But it's important that kind of we step back as researchers and kind of let them generate the results and let them generate kind of the solutions, not only the solutions but also the issues that they're facing.
Do you look at it, Julie, as participatory research as just like a tool in the toolbox, like qualitative, quantitative, participatory, or is it in some way a contrast or just an alternative way of thinking of research altogether?
I think it's an alternative paradigm shift altogether. In fact, when writing my dissertation, I mean, and it's kind of in some ways, when I think about it, and as I was working on my doctoral research, I almost felt frustrated that any participatory researcher almost has to defend. You have to come up and you have to defend why we need to do this over quantitative or qualitative research studies, because in some ways, I mean, a lot of universities have the expertise in this area, but it's very limited when you compare it to participatory research. Like a standard course that you would take at any university, any graduate level course, would be statistics. But it's often not required to take something in kind of egalitarian approaches or participatory research or participatory action research and so on.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, if you can kind of continue guiding us through this because you know, having been brought up in this qualitative quantitative world, it's still nebulous to me. So
right.
Can you kind of show your screen
more.
and a little more?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe just to show you guys, I don't know if you can see this publication. This is for me doing my doctoral. This was I'll switch over to screen share for a second. These are some of the scholarly work that kind of informed my study, and probably many in our audience will have at least some familiarity with Paulo Freire and his work. But in this case, for me, the book that really informed me and really got me excited about participatory research was a book written by Patricia McGuire. And while it's dated, it's so accessible to folks really interested in learning more about participatory research. And so basically her book kind of highlights her struggles as a novice, a brand new beginning participatory researcher in Arizona. And sorry, I think it's New Mexico, and basically it walks through kind of her struggles about how she did participatory research. But as my journal article kind of talked about, kind of in my opinion, there's kind of three central themes to participatory research. It's about primarily creating equitable relations, you know, which involves kind of building trust and shared power between the participants. So this next screen kind of talks about some of the different activities that I, as a facilitator / researcher, did with kind of both the youth groups and the women's groups. We did a variety of activities to kind of help build that trust, because the other thing to keep in mind is that I had a different accent. I was from America. I wasn't from the United States, and I was especially in a foreign country, no less. But the same could have happened because I'm originally from Iowa, in fact. So if I choose, I mean, I've been in West Virginia for 5 years. So anyway, so in any time we kind of approach a different community group in doing this research methodology, there's always an element about building trust and building credibility with your audience. And so again, it's recognizing. So basically, does that help answer your question, guys? Before I ramble
I think we're getting there. I would think maybe what would be important to talk about, because you talk about equitable relationships, and in just a minute, maybe we'll talk about why people might want to consider participatory research as opposed to just doing things the traditional way. But I think right now Stan's got a quick message, and then we'll come back and talk about those why questions.
Okay, great.
Ask an Expert is a service provided by eextension.org where you can get one-to-one expert answers from cooperative extension educators and volunteers from across the United States. So far, approximately 200,000 questions have been asked since 2008 on topics ranging from food preservation to pruning and 4-H to social media. Do you have a burning question? Go to ask.extension.org to get your expert answer. And back to Julie. So I am, like I said, I'm still, okay. So somebody has something that they want to research, right, that they want to look at, and you go in there to help them. And this is participatory research, so you're working with them. But I'm still not seeing how, you know, and I know you said you're out there to defend this, but why you're not, you know, the qualitative methodologies or the quantitative are not, you know, as you're looking at this, whatever the problem is, that they're not coming to play, and why this is different. So it's intriguing. I'm bored, but I'm still okay. You still got a problem that you're researching, right?
Right. Right.
Okay.
Right, and it's probably not to the forefront, or it's not known by many people, because again, it's kind of maybe not part of the standard curriculum that any graduate level or doctoral student would necessarily do at a university. I mean, you almost have to specifically kind of have I don't know, have a professor that maybe has done this or something like that. So, I mean, and the other thing to keep in mind I got my doctoral degree from the University College Dublin in Ireland. So I did not actually take doctoral level classes. So it's a different system altogether, which, that can be debated another day. But anyway, but yeah, so I mean, my professors had a strong background in participatory research, so they kind of encouraged me to kind of look at this approach as a way to kind of conduct research kind of with different community groups. So I mean, kind of back to what Bob was saying about kind of the why question, I think our society is just, I don't know, kind of we're all about kind of social justice issues. We're talking about trying to treat people fairly and stuff like that. So I guess part of the question for me is kind of if I'm doing quantitative research, the research subjects I'm being very objective. I'm not engaged with them. I'm not considering kind of their thoughts. I'm not, I'm just asking. It's kind of a numbers game, which can be, good, but I don't know. I just have this passion for kind of looking at research from a different angle, where kind of participants are actively engaged in the new knowledge that is created. So I know I'm probably not communicating this very well. But.
No, I think you're doing great, Julie. I mean, one of the reasons that this is really interesting to me is that when I've talked about the use of online networks and network literacy and extension for quite a few years, and one of the things that is a paradigm shift sort of in that area is to move from extension educators being the source of all knowledge, like we maybe were 50 or 100 years ago, and moving into an information age where everybody's got access to the knowledge, and now what role do you play? And it's a bit of that leveling of the playing field that I think extension educators and all educators really need to adjust to. And so this really kind of takes that into the research realm, where instead of a researcher or a team of researchers sitting at the university and deciding, here are the questions that we think are important, and here's the methodology that we're going to get, to address this particular issue, you're actually going out, and one of the things you say in your article that I really like is that the researcher and who we used to call the research subjects now are one in the same, or on a level playing field. You're not some researcher addressing hundreds or thousands or tens of subjects that are on a different power dynamic.
Right, and I think there's a place for both, but I think there's a value in participatory research. I mean exactly what you said. It helps level the playing field. It also recognizes that the people in my community have something that they can contribute. To forming new policies and kind of informing laws and things like that. Because I know in our state there's a big push for everything that we do programmatically to create logic models. And so when you think about it. I mean, imagine the impacts. I mean, we're striving for long-term impacts in our communities. So imagine kind of doing participatory research that would help inform kind of some of those long-term, medium-term, and long-term impacts. So. Okay,
so very good. I mean, I'm getting a little clear here, right? I'm the one that's unclear here. Okay, so is there a progression, a model that someone new to this could get their feet wet, as kind of step by step. Okay, this is what you need to do as you're moving forward.
Yeah, I go back to the work by Patricia McGuire. This book here, I know she's had a second edition out since it's come out, but it really is. It's truly like a step-by-step kind of approach, kind of how she goes into depth about how, like we were talking about earlier, how it's an alternative alternative paradigm shift, and kind of justifies why that's the case. And she does. I mean, she walks you through, and that's why it was, I'll be honest, it was a struggle for me to do this endeavor, this type of research, because there weren't many manuals out here, out there to kind of help guide your work. And that's kind of one of the limitations with participatory research, because if you imagine you're in a university setting and you're in a department, and you're doing either quantitative or qualitative, you're kind of in a departmental setting where you have colleagues to bounce ideas off. Like, I was 4 hours removed from my university, so I was renting a place and traveling to 3 different sites for over 2 years. And so, like, I saw my professors maybe twice a year, and we would email back and forth, but sometimes that's not the same, and you don't have that opportunity to kind of debrief and discuss your research as you would necessarily kind of in a traditional kind of quantitative or qualitative studies.
I would imagine in an extension context anyway that one possible place where maybe this is already happening, and it might even be happening in my state, I don't know, but around community vitality and rural community development and things like that, it seems like that area would be an area where it would be ripe for participatory research.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also kind of, I talked about photo voice and participatory video. Those are ideal approaches with both adult audiences as well as youth audiences. And so I'm finishing up my 5th year as an extension agent, and this is my critical year too. So so I finished my doctoral work. So once I get over this hurdle in December, I hope to kind of engage to look at a participatory research project in my community. But I totally agree. I mean, farmer groups, adult women, youth groups, the potential is there for different audiences.
So do you have a research project in mind as you're going forward? I know you have other things that are on your plate right now, but and with if you have one in mind, can you just kind of maybe explain how you're going to approach this, what you're hoping to achieve?
Well, one idea that I have that I've been working on is a photo voice curriculum. There's been a couple that have been written, but I wanted to write it from kind of an extension education perspective, so that's kind of in the pipeline right now. I'm working on that. But as for any kind of potential research projects, I don't have anything specifically in mind, because I'm kind of, part of it is time, but also part of it is I don't want to necessarily force it on, because I have a really active youth group with my 4-H teens. I have a really active one, I don't necessarily, I kind of want to wait for the right time. So it's kind of a combination between my own personal time, because as the article alludes to, kind of there's quite a bit of time involved in participatory research. I mean, there's meetings and there's a lot of time resources that are involved, and so kind of waiting to see kind of after this year. But if there's one, it would be photo voice. That's probably an area that a methodology within participatory research that I'm comfortable with.
You mentioned some of the maybe resistance or criticisms. What have you encountered in that vein, or what's out there in terms of people maybe who are less enthusiastic about participatory research?
Probably it would be, some of the limitations would be, I think people kind of look down on it because they don't necessarily see kind of the rigor that you would perceive kind of with quantitative research per se. And some other limitations can be kind of, like, for example, I had one of my 3 groups was very dysfunctional. Like, it was really hard to work with. So, I mean, that can hinder, and it did hinder some of the research that we did within that group. So, and sometimes you have to recognize that sometimes participatory research isn't always, maybe it's not always the ideal approach. Maybe something is better suited to kind of, to address that issue per se.
It's interesting about, you mentioned one of your groups, being a little bit dysfunctional. I would imagine part of what might happen here too is that there will be less sort of bright and dark separation between am I researching here, or am I facilitating here, or am I educating here?
Yeah, and yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, some days I look back on the 2 years that I was conducting this research project, and yeah, I mean, was no kind of strict delineation as to kind of that you would necessarily find if you were doing a quantitative study. Because again, like the 3 phases of participatory research is like investigating a particular issue, it's educating through kind of group facilitation on the particular issues with your group, and then kind of deciding on an action plan. How are we going to act on some of the issues that were identified in which to kind of help meet this community need? So all of those, I know I make it sound like it's 1, 2, 3, kind of a lot of times kind of you had to work on some of the things like the action step you had to work on the front end kind of. So yeah, it wasn't always kind of a clear delineation between the different steps.
So you mentioned this photo voice. Can you just add a little bit more to that on what this really does, and what it is and what it does?
Yeah, I'll actually go to a screen share. I'll go to a screen share. Where's my PowerPoint? So basically, Photo Voice, again, I worked with a women's group and 2 youth group, and we met again over the course of 18 months, and through that process, during that time, they identified a variety of different issues that their communities were facing. They took photographs, and when they took those photographs, then we kind of sat in a group and we discussed those photographs, what they meant to them, and kind of some of the themes that were coming out of them, and that again kind of informed my research. And then that ended with an exhibition. And we did exhibitions both at the local level, kind of in their respective communities, but then, as I mentioned at the onset of this presentation, that this was a European Union project. So we were also involved. Not only was Ireland involved in this, but like 4 other countries in Europe were involved. So we took all these exhibitions to Brussels and presented it to members of the European Parliament. So that was kind of an empowering event for both the women's group and the 2 youth group, as a result of taking their work kind of and being able to showcase some of the issues that they were facing kind of in their communities, both at the local level and at the European level.
So with the photos, you probably took more photos than you displayed, and how were as far as talking about these photos in a group with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect they had different reactions seeing the same photo and what it meant to them.
Right, and choosing and selecting the photographs that were ultimately featured in the exhibition was kind of a balancing act between kind of the content and the theme that they were trying to convey, and also the technical quality, because part of the thing was we were going to kind of enlarge those photographs to kind of 12 by 16, so you wanted something that was also going to look good in that way. So it was kind of a balancing act. And given the size of the group, and again, they were out in their community, which were small communities of, say, kind of 1,000 people, we spent like several days just walking around, kind of taking photographs. So a lot of the photos were duplicates, if that makes sense. So it was easy to kind of select kind of and draw down kind of the different themes that emerge from each group.
So what were the outcomes, Julie, maybe of that particular project? Like, what did you accomplish, I guess? Can you put it another way?
Right. Some of the things, I guess, yes, I would love to be able to say that kind of that services improved and access to different things increased as a result of this project. But I think kind of one of the biggest outcomes was just an increased awareness about kind of some of the struggles that young people are facing in these respective communities, as well as kind of the adult women. And for them, for all of them, it was like a lack of access to to transportation. Young people wanted to kind of go to different places, and many of them couldn't drive, especially if they were under the age of 16, so it was hard for them to get around and so on. So.
Very good. Hey, time for another quick break here. This one is from learn.extension.org. Learn.extension.org is your free access to cutting-edge learning events. These professional development sessions are brought to you by eXtension and are open to anyone. Popular topics include finance, energy, social media for business, and many others. Many of the sessions are recorded for your viewing convenience. Look to learn something new and check out a session at learn.extension.org. So last pause for a while, but hey, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I have learned a new method of research, even on the fringes, but it kind of exposed me to it, so I really appreciate that. So
thank you both for the invitation. Thank you very much.
yeah, absolutely. But real quick, going around the room, what kind of cool things do you got coming up that you're working on that you want to share with everyone? And Bob?
Boy, after we've already done this, why am I surprised by this question? I knew you were going to ask it, but I am surprised. I don't know if I mentioned this in our last show or not, but we should be coming out with our latest smartphone app. This is actually a tablet app for iOS called Small Business Disaster Plan, in a series of apps that I've been working on over the years to help with different disaster response and disaster planning issues. And so that should be coming out soon. Look for an announcement on that in the next month or so.
Very cool. Sounds fun. And Julie, what do you got coming up that you're working on?
I'm working on my cumulative file. I'm going up for promotion and tenure this year, so that's due December 15th, so that's kind of the big monkey on my back at the moment. But otherwise, my teens are working on a 4-H Heritage Quilt Trail for our county, and things are, we're very close to we have one quilt block displayed on the Extension office here in Wayne County. But yeah, there's other pieces of the puzzle that are finally starting to come together, so it's pretty exciting.
Very cool. And I have a big move, packing on Thursday, heading to Jamestown on Friday, and Jamestown, New York, new job. So I understand they're getting like 12 inches of snow while we speak. So
there's still time, Stan. You can still back out.
Yeah, afraid not. Afraid not. I've cleared all the stuff off my wall, so
I see it's pretty sparse in there.
Yeah.
Wow! Congratulations, Dan.
Thank you. And Julie, this has been a great topic. I have learned quite a bit. It's been tremendously fun. I think it's got some potential here. So I'd love to see a follow-up article. See if you can kind of give a framework for how somebody can pursue this. So.
Okay.
Thanks, Julie. It's been great.
All right.
Thank you, Bob.
And for you guys, why don't you hang on real quick, and we'll shut this thing down, and we'll chat for a sec. So, hey, everybody, thank you for participating in another session of What's Up, Joe? And we hope to catch you soon once I figure out what the heck I'm doing in Jamestown, New York.